As my channel grows into being more of a fantasy genre as a whole-based channel, I figured it was a good idea to give you guys a sense of my taste and kind of what I feel about different series, and there's no better place to start than a top 10 list. I really like top 10 lists. They keep everything simple, they're easy to get through, I like watching them, so I'm gonna do one of my own, and you can't stop me. Try and stop me right now. I bet you can't. That's right. That's right. You couldn't stop me. I will say before I get into this list is absolutely subject to change, apart from like maybe a couple of them, because even while I was writing it, I had to change it like 5 or 6 times. I kept rearranging stuff. There's stuff I've left off because I'm not sure how I feel about it, and I'll put those in the honorable mentions category, but they could be slotted in here or there. It's really just kind of subjective to how I'm feeling in the moment, and I feel like the list that I have right now is pretty subjective to how I feel right now, so it's pretty accurate, but it's not like 100%. But anyway, let's not waste time. Let's jump right into the honorable mentions. The first of which is going to be a series that I actually just finished pretty recently, and I don't really know how to feel about the fact that it's not going to be finished by its original author. I have a complicated relationship with it. I'm not sure how to place it on this list, even though I think I like it more than some of the stuff that I currently have it on there. I know I like it more than some of the stuff I currently have on there, but I just don't know how to rank it, so I'm leaving it in the honorable mentions, and I am of course talking about Berserk. I loved Berserk. I think it is a masterpiece. I think it is a towering masterpiece, in fact, and I definitely enjoy it more than some of these series that I'm going to be talking about later, but I just don't know how to rank it among everything. Berserk has some of the finest character work I have ever encountered, some of the most atmospheric drawing and writing that I've ever seen in a manga. It has some of the greatest moments I've ever encountered, just some massive emotional climaxes intersected with this eldritch horror kind of idea that he's morphed into all these different high fantasy concepts, and it's so cool the way he executes it. It has some incredible monster design, some incredible villains, some really amazing thematic writing. It really is a masterpiece. I just don't know how to fit it into my top 10 because it's so wildly different than anything else I've read, and even the things I would compare it to, I just don't know how it matches up to those because it's such a unique experience within this genre. And then there's also, of course, the fact that it's not going to be finished by Kentaro Miura because he sadly passed away, and I just don't know how I feel about that, because some of these other series aren't complete that I have on this list, but the author is still working on them and is still actively doing it, and I have every reason to believe that they're going to finish it before they die. Fingers crossed, knock on wood, but, it just, with Berserk, that's not going to happen. We know that's not going to happen, so I can't rank it right now. But I will tell you, just off the rip, it deserves to be on my top 10. It's only in the honorable mentions because of my complicated relationship, feelings-wise, with it. So, Berserk is my first honorable mention, and also kind of in that same vein, but not quite for the same reasons, Lord of the Rings. I know it feels weird to not put it in my top 10. Lord of the Rings is one of the most influential series I've ever consumed. I've seen the movies a million goddamn times. I have loved Lord of the Rings since I was a child. It has basically influenced every single thing on this list in some way, shape, or form. It's influenced, I would argue, all modern fantasy to some degree, even if it's not having direct parallels with the stories that we're reading nowadays. But its influence is undeniable, and I always don't know how to put it on any kind of list, because how do you put Lord of the Rings on any of those lists? It's like the grandfather of fantasy. Like, how do you fit it in with all this other stuff that you're reading? I don't know how I can possibly ever compare it to all this other stuff, because it's like it gave birth to all that, how do I put it up with something like the Stormlight Archive, which through a weird series of events has also been influenced by Lord of the Rings, even though it's like really indirect. It's like a number of pathways that have branched off from that to reach that point. But how do I compare those two things, So I can't put it on my top 10 list, but it deserves to be on there. I love Lord of the Rings. Everyone goddamn loves Lord of the Rings, but I can't put it on here. I just can't do it. I can't bring myself to compare it to any of these series, so it's also gonna be an honorable mention for me. And now you're starting to see why I had such a hard time making this list, because I kept having these factors come into my brain while I was evaluating these series and going, well, actually, because of this, maybe it's worse than this one. I can't, it's all vibes right now. The top 10 for right now, everything you're gonna see from here on, all vibes. And number 10, I'm about to get to number 10, I definitely like it worse than I like the two honorable mentions. I like it worse than some of the other stuff that I left off also, but the vibes right now, it's number 10. So we're actually, while we're on this topic, let's just jump right into number 10. Number 10 is The Dark Tower. The reason that the vibes are working for Dark Tower right now is because I read it at the end of last year while I was reading a couple of other series that had much more traditional fantasy elements within them. They were definitely following the classic high fantasy route with their own twists on it, some unique spins, new ideas that they were including, but Dark Tower was also epic fantasy, just in a completely different vein. It's about as far separated as you can get from classic high fantasy while also having some of the key elements that ties it into the genre. It's got aspects of westerns, it's got aspects of horror because it's written by Stephen King, so of course there's horror elements in there. There's gunslinger stuff, there's like knights and stuff that it's got everything. It's really, really weird. It's definitely not for everyone. I can't, in good faith, recommend this series to anyone without knowing their taste first, without knowing what their stomach is for certain things and what their ability to kind of, bend their mind kind of in one direction or the other based off of what the book is trying to do. Because not everyone likes that kind of stuff. But once I know your taste, if I know you're up for really weird shit, I'm always going to point you towards The Dark Tower because it is extremely weird, but it's also highly emotional, and it has, again, because it's so strange, it has very memorable moments that are littered throughout the series that are just seared into my memory because, wow, they were super fucking weird. This series essentially follows this guy named the Gunslinger and his quartet, aka just a group of people that have been kind of tied to the same destiny as him, in his pursuit of reaching the Dark Tower, which is sort of the nexus of all universes, and it follows their journey towards the Dark Tower, and that's the basic plot of the series, but it takes a lot of really weird twists and turns, and it takes some very strange narrative decisions, and there's a lot of really amazing character work buried in those pages, but there's a lot of just ephemeral, strange occurrences that they're going through on this journey. I'm also just a really big Stephen King fan. I like a lot of his other works, and The Dark Tower is sort of the nexus of not only the universes in the book or whatever, it's the nexus of all his books coming together. A lot of characters from other books show up in this series, and they're all kind of tied together. Characters see things from other of the series and some of his other standalone books and whatnot, and they all come together, so it's sort of his magnum opus of all his stories being connected in that way, and I really appreciate that he was even able to pull that off at all. And it also has meta commentary on his own writing and stuff. It's a lot. It's a lot. So I only recommend that if you have the stomach for really, really out there ideas and concepts. But I really appreciate what it does. I appreciate the risks that it takes, and that's why I'm putting it on my top 10 list. All right, moving on to number 9. I'm gonna have the Farseer Trilogy by Robin Hobb. I'm gonna be fully honest with you. I think that this could end up being a lot higher on this list. I really loved the Farseer Trilogy, but it's just one trilogy in a series that is 16 books long. So I can't really put it any higher than number 9, no matter how much I loved it. It just feels wrong for me to put it any higher than that, not having the complete story of these characters, because definitely where it's left off, I mean, it's technically a conclusion to character arcs, but there's a lot more story that could be told, so I can't really put it any higher than that. I am very excited to continue that series, which is called The Realm of the Elderlings, if you don't know about it. The Farseer Trilogy follows the bastard of this kingdom who is taken in by the royal family, but he's not really, fully taken in because he's a bastard, and it just follows him growing up in on castle grounds and all the things he goes through, and he ends up becoming You guessed it, an assassin for the royal family. It is called The Assassin's Apprentice. That's the name of the first book. And it's Royal Assassin, I believe. And then I can't remember the last one. But it's all about him being an assassin, even though, weirdly enough, he doesn't do a whole lot of assassination in that trilogy, now that I'm thinking about it, but he is an assassin. The best thing about the Farseer trilogy, by far, is the character work done on the main character, who is named Fitz. The character of Fitz is perhaps the most frustrating person to ever read. Out of all the books I've read, for sure, he is the most frustrating character I have ever encountered, because it's told all through his perspective. It's a first-person perspective through his eyes, so you fully understand his thought processes, his experiences. You fully understand why he does what he does. And you disagree with almost every decision that he makes. He is so frustrating as a person, and you love him so much because you see him from when he's a child, and you follow him through his teenage years, and you see him develop, and I cared about him so much, and I kept getting so mad at him for the dumbest shit that he was doing, but like, I understood how he came to the conclusions that he came to for the decisions that he made. I'm still mad thinking about it. I read these last year, and I still get upset thinking about some of the things he did, because I wanted better for him, and that's the beauty of this series, is that the character work is so well done that you get incredibly invested in this character, and you start to get angry at the things he's doing, because you know that he can do better, and you know that he can make smarter decisions. That's the appeal of the series to me, is that it's very dark. It has a lot of really sad moments. It is perhaps the grimmest story that I've ever read. I hesitate to say that, but it is very bleak. The characters don't get any breaks in this series. It's fantasy, but it doesn't have the happy-go-lucky feeling that a lot of fantasy has. There's no happy endings for the most part. Usually, when something bad happens, a character does not recover from it in this series, and I appreciate that thematically. Robin Hobb never strays from that. She never strays from writing a character into a hole and then not pulling him out of it, because sometimes that's just what happens to people. And her writing is just really absorbing in the first place. It's very detailed, and it draws you in just from the first word. It's very transportative. She has just a way of writing that really just sucks you into everything that's going on. I love the Farseer trilogy. I can't wait to continue that series, but I've been holding off because I need to be like in the right frame of mind to be reading that series, because like I said, it's very bleak, and good things don't happen very often, so I definitely need to like mentally prepare before I jump back into that series. So yes, I highly recommend the Farseer trilogy if you're a fantasy fan. Coming in at number 8 is actually going to be a sci-fi series, but where's the line between fantasy and sci-fi? It's kind of blended. It really just depends on what, if you're like a stickler about certain things or not. I'm fine with people including sci-fi in any of their lists, because a lot of times the science they're using in sci-fi is basically just magic anyway. So I'm including sci-fi on my list. So at number 8, we're gonna have Red Rising. This is again a series that I just read not that long ago, but man, it just blew me away, and it really reworked my ideas about what prose can be in a story, because Pierce Brown's prose in Red Rising is very direct. It's very clippy. He moves at a pace that is breakneck basically at all times through all 5 books that are released right now. You're basically sprinting the whole way. I mean, he gives you breaks every now and then, but you're moving along at a clip that whole time, and he does this through the use of present tense. Everything that's happening in the book, it's not he said, she said, it's he says, or stuff like that. He's in the present tense, so it moves you along in this way that makes you feel like you're really there with the characters. By not adding that extra layer of like separation from you and the character, it's also all first person, even though you eventually get multiple perspectives, and you see those new perspectives through their own eyes. They use I when they talk about themselves, and you move between these characters, but they're all so well defined that you don't even really notice that it's still first person when you're doing that. That's something that I thought was masterful that he pulled off. But this entire time, he puts you on the ground with these characters in a story that is very bloody and intense, that has a lot of just heated, intense moments just all throughout. It's about a guy who is there's a class system that is split up from red to gold, gold being at the top, red being basically slaves. This is far in the future with technology far advanced beyond what we have, and it's about a guy who is a red who has been lied to his whole life about what the truth of the galaxy is. He thinks that, he exists in these like mines and that there's no world to inhabit, that Mars is this inhabitable planet, and then he discovers the truth that he's a slave who has been working his whole life. Everyone who is a red has been working their whole life in these mines, and they've been lied to because civilization has flourished and expanded all through the cosmos without them, and everyone's living lavish lives and they have their fancy technology and stuff, and meanwhile they've been toiling away in the mines this whole entire time. So this guy, he's basically leading a revolution to overthrow the golds. That's like his whole goal, and he is driven and he goes after that goal doggedly the entire series. It is fantastic writing because it's so basic of an idea of just like, here's a guy who's gonna lead a slave uprising. Like basically that's the plot of the books, right? But it expands into this space opera with all these different factions and politicking and all these different characters that have their own schemings and stuff. And the way that it expands from the first book being kind of just Hunger Games adjacent to being this enormous, huge story that's encompassing all these different people. It is masterful the way that he opens up everything through time, and that's something I appreciate in any series. It's something that I'll talk about later in some of these other series, the way that they can expand from a very simple concept to this whole new thing, and it's almost like a totally different series by the time you're caught up to everything. And speaking of Red Rising, Book 6 Lightbringer comes out just this summer, so if you need a series to get into right now, and you just like want to be on the wave of a new book when everyone else is reading it, now would be the time to pick up Red Rising. The first couple books are pretty short, they're pretty fast to get through, and also every book is paced really well, so you're not going to like find yourself lagging at any point. So highly recommend if you need a series to pick up right now and you want to be in on it when the next one comes out. Now is the time. Alright, so now we're at number 7, and it's going to be the Dresden Files. I have a history with this series. It's like 18 books long. I think we just had book 18 like a couple of years ago. It's really long. It's a really long series. The books are pretty short, so it's not like the worst thing ever. But I have a history with this because during high school, I didn't really read a lot of books. I've talked about this before, but when I was a kid, I was like a Harry Potter kid, like, everyone was. And then I read like Percy Jackson, I read The Hunger Games and stuff. And then I started to have to read books for school, and I kind of just stopped reading, and it was like lame or whatever, and I kind of stopped. And for a while, I wasn't really reading for pleasure. It was just, if I had an assignment, I was reading a book for school. And then I remember my mom gave me the first book in the Dresden Files called Stormfront, and I just ate it up. It totally reinvigorated my love for reading, and I just tore through those books in the next year. I read all of them, and I was only reading at night before bed. I was occasionally reading during the day, but I was still definitely getting back into the habit of reading, and this series captured my attention for that entire time, and I just went through that whole series, and then I moved on after that, but it has a special place in my heart. I definitely look back on it and I have issues with some of the things because I've learned a lot more about writing and about reading, and my taste has changed a lot since then. But that series is always going to have a special place in my heart because of that. And if you don't know, the Dresden Files is about essentially a wizard detective living in Chicago. And he solves magical crimes. It's fucking awesome, dude. That's such a good concept. And like I said about Red Rising, this starts off pretty basic. I actually really like the early books. I know some people say you have to get to a certain point. I enjoyed the early books. It's got this PI noir feel to it, but with magic. It's awesome. It's freaking great. But it slowly expands into world-ending stakes where he's fighting gods and that has all sorts of mythology. Something I really love about this series is that it has all different kinds of fantasy. There's fairies, there's gods, there's Greek mythology, there's all sorts, there's knights and angels and everything magic that you can imagine. There's trolls, there's wizards, all sorts of really cool stuff. Basically, any fantasy element you can think of has been woven in because the world gets opened up quite a bit, and you realize that, like, all the stories throughout history have been real, and that they've just, like, slowly faded out of the world throughout time, and slowly over time, he goes from just being, like, this PI in Chicago to being someone who's defending the entire world, and I really love the way that it ramps up, and it's a very engaging story, again, through the main character, because it's a first-person story, and by the time you're on book 18, he has grown and changed considerably, and you start to really appreciate what his train of thought is, because you've been with him through a lot of horrific experiences. So I really appreciate what is done with the main character, his name is Harry Dresden, by the way, which is, again, just an awesome name. I will always recommend these books for anyone who is trying to get back into reading, because that's what it did for me, and it's very easy to pick up. It's not complicated at first. It takes a while for the world to really start to develop, so you can kind of just get in there and just kind of sink your teeth into it, and you don't have to, like, overthink things. You don't have to be kind of trudging your way through a lot of exposition and world building. You just have a fun story, and then another one, and you slowly get the details, and you slowly get all the stuff, and it's not, like, ever overbearing in that way. So, if you're getting back into fantasy reading, Dresden Files is the way to go, if you ask me. Alright guys, number 6, I don't know how I feel about this one. Now that I've gotten to it, I don't know if I want to keep it at number 6, but I'm gonna leave it. Number 6 is Game of Thrones. I don't know how I feel about this, because the rest of these are like books or manga, and yes, Game of Thrones, there is a book series that it's based off of. It's called A Song of Ice and Fire. I actually have all of them. I haven't read any of them. I haven't read A Song of Ice and Fire before. I've only seen the show, but the show had a huge impact on me as the way I consume media as a whole, so that translates over to reading also, but I feel weird about having it at number 6 because, again, it's not technically done. The show is done. Let's pretend that the ending never happened. Let's pretend that season 8 never happened. Game of Thrones isn't done, okay? A Song of Ice and Fire is not complete in my eyes, alright? I refuse to accept that season 8 was the end, okay? That's not the real ending. That's not the canon ending, alright? He's gonna change it. He's never gonna finish the series, okay? I've accepted it. But one can dream, and I will just, I'll read fan fiction or something for the ending. If I really want it, if he's never gonna finish it, I'll read fan fiction. I'm going on a ramble. I'm done, okay? The reason I feel weird about putting it at number 6 is because the ending sucks in the show. It's also a show. It's not a book series like the rest of these. So okay? I feel weird, but it's masterful, alright? With the first 5-6 seasons, masterful writing. It has incredible character work. Literally every one of the main characters is so well drawn, so well depicted, and they all have such compelling story arcs, and a lot of that, yes, in the show has to do with how good the acting is and how good, like, the production is, but I know that fans of the books also say the same thing, that it's, like, just translated super well to screen. So I love Game of Thrones. It has everything I want in a series. It has great character work, great action sequences, lots of amazing twists and subversions. It has dragons. It's awesome. It's fantastic. This was also what kind of moved me from being a lot more lighthearted in my media consumption. I kind of needed happy stories all the time, to me really appreciating when an author can be brutal for effect, when it can really just dig in and just shock you with what it does. I used to hate that kind of stuff. Game of Thrones made me appreciate it, and that you'll see that reflected in the top 5 of my list here, where a lot of these series are things that are very gritty and have a lot of darker tones to them that I wouldn't have appreciated if I didn't intake Game of Thrones first. So I feel weird putting it on here. I do. I feel strange. But the vibes, man. We're going back to the vibes. I'm including it and I'm leaving it. So Game of Thrones is number 6. At number 5, again, I feel like this should be higher. But I'm gonna leave it at number 5 because I have my thoughts on everything else. Number 5 is the Stormlight Archive. This probably comes as a surprise to everyone who is on my channel. If you're in, like, the Discord server, if you follow my shorts or whatever, I talk about Brandon Sanderson a lot, and I talk about the Stormlight Archive a lot. I talk about the Cosmere as a whole a lot. I am a huge Brandon Sanderson fan. I've read all but, like, 2 of his books. I am really invested in the universe that he's created. I am anxiously awaiting Stormlight number 5. I've been literally watching every single weekly update he puts out. I am heavily invested in the Stormlight Archive. I think it is phenomenal. It is easily one of the best fantasy series I have ever read. But I can't put it higher than number 5 because of some of these other series. I appreciate what the other series are doing a little bit more. Like they kind of scratch an itch that I kind of need scratched better than the Stormlight Archive does. Stormlight Archive is unparalleled, essentially, in terms of world building, in terms of the magic system. It has some of the most epic moments I've ever encountered in fantasy. There are some amazing fight sequences, like at the end of books. There are some characters that are like my top 10 characters of all time. Kaladin Stormbless is one of my favorite characters of all time. Dalinar Kholin is one of my favorite characters of all time. It is massive in scope. It has some of the greatest, and I mean greatest, world-building aspects that you will ever encounter. I know I already mentioned that, but really that's like the biggest thing about this series to me. It's just how detailed everything is. Everything has its place. I mean, I've read somewhere that he planned this for like 20 years, just getting all the intricacies of everything that goes on in the Stormlight down to like a T. And I honestly think that this will end up higher when it's done, because there's only 4 books out. It's going to end up being 10 books. By the time it's done, I could easily see this being like top 2, top 3 in my all-time list, but I can't put it there yet because it's not done yet. And I've said some of these other series aren't done yet either, so like I feel weird saying that as a complaint, but this is one that I know is going to be done. Brandon Sanderson is a printing press, and I can't put it higher than this without the rest of the story yet, because I know it's coming soon. He's already halfway done with Stormlight 5. But anyway, I'm going to do like I did for the other series. If you haven't read Stormlight Archive, let me give you the little pitch and let me tell you what it's about. It's really hard to condense the Stormlight Archive into like a single summary, but the best thing that I can do is that there's this war going on between this nation of men and this other race called the Parshendi, and they're fighting out on this place called the Shattered Plains. And it's following a bunch of the different storylines that kind of get interwoven into this conflict and sort of the emergence of magic within all of this and how the characters are involved in that emergence. That's kind of the best description I can give, but it's way more interesting than that, I promise you. It's just, I would have to explain every single person's individual storyline to really give you the full picture, and there's a lot of characters. And these books are massive. They're like 1,300 pages long, at the smallest of the 4. So, Stormlight Archive is phenomenal, and I could sing its praises all day, but that's why it's not my top 4 or 3. You know, it's not up there quite yet because there are other things I like in these other series a bit more, and they're also done. Like the stories are, for the most part, are like a complete cohesive thing already. So that's why it's at number 5. It could be higher very easily. Okay, we're on the one that I've been the most nervous to talk about. I feel like I'm gonna get shit from some people, but you know what? I'm gonna do it anyway. And this, honestly, this is weird to also include in fantasy, but I include it. It has fantastical elements. It is absolutely a fantasy. I had an argument with someone about this, but I stand by what I think. I think this is a fantasy, and this is Attack on Titan. If you see here, I have the Scout Regiment tattooed on me right here. This series, I think, is a masterpiece. I know everyone has their ideas on the ending. It's a very controversial ending. There are people who have said some really, really crazy stuff about Attack on Titan. Some people really don't like the way that it went in the end. Some people think it's like the worst ending to anything ever. I disagree. I've been shit on so many times for voicing that on the internet. But I disagree, okay? I disagree. I think the ending, at worst, is fine, okay? I think at worst, it's fine for wrapping everything up, and it's thematically sound for a lot of the things that were set up at the beginning of the story. So even if you hate it, I think that it does some things right, okay? And I'm not getting into this. I'm not getting into this right now, all right? I'm going to talk about what I like about it. You can argue with the wall right now. Ending aside, let's cut out the ending, alright? I think pretty much everyone who gets into Attack on Titan can agree that up until a certain point, where there's a certain divergence point, up until a certain point, it is immaculate. It is so freaking good, dude. The attention to detail in Attack on Titan is, bar none, there is nothing that even kind of scratches the surface, okay? Some of these other series that are on this list also have incredible foreshadowing, incredible detail that is littered throughout the books, and that, like, truly, a lot of these series, Stormlight Archive is an example of that. There's a lot of stuff like that in that series, and some of the other stuff that I'm going to talk about later has stuff like that too. But Attack on Titan just does it in a way that the way the mystery unfolds and the way that all these details are planted and you just totally miss them. And every single little thing that happens throughout this series has significance. It's truly mind-boggling how he must have plotted everything out and brought it together. And I'm sure there was some like backwork stuff where he was like, ooh, I bet I can tie this in. I'm going to make this work here. I know that Oda probably does that for One Piece also, which I'm going to talk about that in a little bit. But Attack on Titan, to me, there's no fluff on the edges of this. There is no fluff whatsoever. Every single detail that he puts in there is utilized in some way, shape, or form. It also has phenomenal character work. Regardless of how you feel about Eren Yeager, the fact that so many people have discussions about him and argue about him and have all these different opinions about him is the mark of a good character, all right? I'll say it. I think that's the mark of an incredible character when it's so polarizing, when he's so engaging as a person that people feel the need to argue over him at all, to me signifies that he's an incredible character. I truly think that the mysteries within Attack on Titan and the way that they all get unraveled is up there with pretty much any other mysteries that you can think of, and pretty much any of these stories that I've talked about so far. The pacing is also really good in Attack on Titan. It's not too long, it's not too short, it's consistently engaging, it consistently has interesting things being introduced and resolved. I really like the pacing in Attack on Titan. Once again, if you don't know, Attack on Titan is about this society that must live in the walls of this place because outside these walls are these things called Titans, which are these giant humanoid figures that eat people, and this is basically all about the defense of these walls and trying to keep the Titans out. But I can't really explain it any more than that, but it follows a young boy who, when one of the walls is destroyed, his mother is eaten, and he vows to destroy all Titans. That's the most basic plot description I can give you of this story. Okay, so at number 3 is a series my last video was on this series. It's the First Law Trilogy. I think this is just because I'm riding the high, but I think that this is some of the most phenomenal character writing ever. Just ever. Every single character in First Law is so freaking good, dude. This is Grimdark to a T. Not only is it really heavy on the themes of this story, is how dark the world can be sometimes, how unfair the world can be sometimes, and how even though someone grows and changes, their life doesn't move anywhere, or sometimes the inverse of that, how their life can change and the tides can come and go, but who they are as a person remains unchanged because they're incapable of finding it in themselves to become a better person. It's genius writing, it is phenomenal, and I really think that the plotting in this book, just like I said for Attack on Titan, is ingenious. There's a lot of stuff early on that I was just like, okay, like, why are we seeing this right now? Like, what's the point of this? Actually, I talked about this in my podcast episode. The first book, when I first read it, I was like, it was good. It was good. It was all right. Now I consider it to be a 10 out of 10 because of everything that it sets up for these characters and for this story. It is truly amazing the way that everything develops throughout just 3 books. He accomplishes in 3 books what some authors would struggle to do in like 10 books. He does more in character arcs in about 1,000 pages, I think that's roughly how long this entire series is, than some people can pull off in much more than that. He does so much good work with the character. I mean, I can't overstate it. The longer I've sat with this series, it's been just like a week or two since I finished them. Oh, I love it so much, dude. It's so good. I couldn't refrain. I immediately picked up, there's 3 standalone sequels after the first Law trilogy, and then there's a sequel trilogy, and I couldn't keep away, man. I couldn't keep away. I started the next standalone sequel, and dude, it's so good. I'm finding it hard to articulate because, again, I'm riding the high of it still. It's so freaking good. Just read it. Just read it if you want Grimdark, if you want phenomenal character work, read the first Law trilogy, okay? This is, and I'm not even done. I still have books to read. I'm so happy about that because it's all so good. Okay, I'm done. I'm done talking about that. Okay, guys, so I haven't actually really talked about this a whole lot. I think I mentioned it in one other of my videos, but at number 2, we have the Malazan Books of the Fallen. This is a series that I can't really recommend it to most people. I don't know how I can recommend it to most people, knowing that they'll probably drop it pretty early on, because this is, beyond any of these other series, this is the hardest one to get into, because what happens in this series is that you're plopped down into a world with basically no exposition. You're literally dropped down into the middle of a war. You're not told anything. Nothing is explained to you about this massive, gargantuan world with tons and tons of different perspectives. I mean, I don't remember the exact count, but there's, I believe, almost like 1,000 perspectives throughout this 10-book series. It is genuinely jaw-dropping, just in scale, how fucking enormous this world is, how enormous this plot is. It's massive, dude. It's enormous. And you're thrown into it in book 1 with nothing explained, and you just have to figure it out. Like, it feels like you're in the middle of a plot. Like, it feels like you just picked up book 3 and you're like, who are these people? What is this place? Why are you not explaining anything to me? And you just have to, like, swim through the waters and figure out what's going on. And that's the magic of the series, because he does that to you over and over and over. I believe it's book 5. You literally, at that point, you've kind of figured it out, because you're on book 5, right? And you're like, I figured this out. I know who the characters are. I know who the major players are. I know, like, what the layout of this world is. I figured out the socio-political, kind of build of everything around. And then he moves you to a whole new continent with whole new characters in a whole different time period. And he just throws you in there. It's psychotic behavior. But if you can get past that, if you can get past not understanding, not knowing what's going on, and having to figure it out, you have to really think sometimes. And you have to kind of have like a compendium in your head of like, who the fuck was that guy again? And you kind of have to just figure it out as you go. If you can get over that, this is unparalleled in high fantasy. It is unparalleled. It has the most massive, epic moments. Nothing rivals them. Nothing rivals them. It is jaw-dropping constantly what he pulls off in threading all of these weaves, all of these point of views, all of these details, and all of these people, and he brings them together for these incredible climaxes that are just, I'll never forget them. I still think about them. I finished that series 1.5 years ago, and I still think about it constantly. I still think about it all the time. I remember moments, and I'm like, that was incredible. It's just so grand. It is so epic. I mean, literally the definition of epic. It is so huge in scale, and it's so satisfying the way that every book just, it almost always improves, and it almost always just gets better with the way that he tells the story. And I'm having a hard time articulating this because it's so huge that I don't even know how to explain it to you. I don't even know how to explain what this story is and like what it does well, because it does so many things well. How do I pick just one? I guess I will say that Malazan is extremely dark. It has a lot of really, really heavy moments, some really, really like scarring things. That's why I, in my video where I said, if you like this manga, read this book, I said, if you're a fan of Berserk, you should check out Malazan, because in terms of tone and in terms of like what the author is willing to do to characters, it's up there with Berserk. I mean, I would say sometimes darker than Berserk. It has stuff that you're just like, holy crap, I can't believe you just wrote that. Oh my god. Malazan really doesn't pull any punches, so if you do end up ever getting into it, emotionally prepare yourself. It's a lot. It's a lot to deal with. And at number 1, I'm gonna have the least to say about this out of pretty much all of them. It's One Piece. I've talked about this so much on my channel. I've talked about it extensively, just so much. I really don't have anything new to say about One Piece. It's the best story I've ever consumed. It does things differently than a lot of the series that I've listed off, and I actually think that some of those series do things better than this. I think that there are series that are not even on my top 10 list that do specific things better than One Piece. But One Piece, it has everything, man. It has everything. And I think that's really, when I revisit it in my head, when I look back on the things I loved about it, it just has all the elements of everything that I like somewhere in it to some degree or another. It doesn't necessarily always lean into like dark things, but there are dark events in One Piece. It doesn't always get into like the inner machinations of a character's psyche, but sometimes it does. It doesn't always have huge epic emotional climaxes. Sometimes it does. It just has all that stuff, and it does it really well most of the time. One Piece is very flawed. It has a lot of things that I don't like. There are some decisions that Eiichiro Oda has made in the narrative. Fake deaths. But that gives it charm in its own way. It's like Oda's writing quirks, and they don't necessarily, like, destroy the story when they happen. It's just kind of like, why did you do that, man? Like, come on, you're better than that. So I kind of am okay with that, but One Piece, I mean, it just towers above everything else. Like, it's the most important story that I've ever read. It has everything that I want in a story, and it's just emotionally impacted me in a lot of different ways, and I truly think that the fact that one man has been writing it for 25 years and is still trucking along and still improving, by the way, is mind-boggling. I can't think of any other story that is like an example of that. I really can't off the top of my head. This is, in my opinion, the furthest that the human imagination can go in terms of storytelling. It really just, it has everything, and it just brings all these creative ideas to life, and he draws them in a way that is so uniquely his vision. It's just stunning, just absolutely stunning. Again, I'm not going to talk too much about One Piece, but that's the gist of why I love it so much. So yeah, that's my top 10 list. I feel like I did a lot of rambling. This is 48 minutes long right now, so we'll see what happens after editing though, because I don't know if it's going to remain that long. I really love talking about this series. That's why I'm doing a top 10 list, because I really just want to share with you guys what my favorite series are. Hopefully this expanded your TBR somewhat. Maybe you've been like hesitant about reading some of these, and my enthusiasm may have swayed you here. That's kind of what my goal was with this. I'll probably end up making another one of these top 10 series sometime in the future, but for now, I'm gonna leave it at this, and I'm not gonna mess with it, because I spent a lot of time trying to figure out the rankings for everything, and I'm not fully happy with it, but it's good enough. And I'll probably rework it in like a year or so once I've read more and more stuff, because I'm still consistently working my way through series. So I'll try and update you guys sometime in the future to show you what my new top 10 looks like. But until then, I hope you're happy and healthy, I hope you're doing well, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye!